Hello and welcome to another reaction stream, maybe also more of a discussion stream in some way, as I feel like I'm gonna yap a lot since I always have so much to say about this kind of subject. But yeah, this is kind of like a test stream and another like tangent of my Frenchman learns about Japan. Obviously, you know, we all know anime videos can be kind of yabai to check out because YouTube copyright is pretty extreme with anime videos. So this is kind of like a test stream. We're gonna watch a couple videos from the channel Mother's Basement. All the videos are linked in the description with timestamps if you're watching the VOD. And yeah, again, it's gonna be kind of a test today. I picked a few with a subject that interests me and that I want to yap about. And depending on how this does, I mean, as always, I don't really mind getting demonetized and all that, but blocked is always the problem, right? We'll see if this works out as far as reaction. As I always say, there's genuinely a difference between what gets blocked in video reaction versus stream reaction. And I feel like anime is maybe more yabai. So again, it's kind of a test stream, you know. Yeah, test stream. We'll see what happens, basically. But yeah, to give you a bit more context, this channel, Mother Basement, is actually a channel I used to watch years ago, and I had just forgotten about. You know, for those of you who've been around a long time on the English anime YouTube, back in 2015 maybe, I got into a guy called Digibro. He was this guy who was insanely prolific in terms of like anime videos and just everything else. Like he had so much stuff going on between podcasts, written anime videos and many things. But I really enjoyed the anime videos about many different topics. Eventually he started a podcast called the Procrastinator Podcast, which I became a big fan and I followed for many years. There was a bunch of people on it, other anime YouTuber like Best Guy Ever, but also at some point Mother's Basement, and that's how I discovered him. He didn't really jive much with the group, to be honest, so I don't think he lasted very long, and that's kind of when I stopped, like, you know, keeping up with him, and I kind of forgot, right? I kept following like the PCP and most of the members until like the early 2020s when everything fell apart and most of them went their own direction and all that. You know, and yeah, recently I was thinking of watching some anime video on stream, and I rediscovered this channel. I don't tell the name in like so long. So yeah, I picked a few videos to watch. That's my story. We'll see if it's good stuff. I mean, I remember his video were good like a long time ago. I mean, I don't even know when I first watched him, like 2017, 16, 18, whenever again he was in the PCP podcast. I mean, it was a long time ago. I can't even tell you. Yeah. So yeah. And again, if you guys know any anime channel that do video essay and stuff like that, that could be interesting to watch, let me know, as always. But yeah, I decided to watch some videos first about fantasy anime. First is the Golden Age of Fantasy anime, and then the Gamer Fantasy Problem, and then we have an Isekai video which kind of ties in, I feel like. And if I feel like it, we'll also watch a video about Parasite are eating your hobbies. But for now, those 3 videos are like the main topic I want to go on today. You guys know I absolutely love fantasy anime, but I am really tired of Isekai, or like, you know, fantasy anime that try to subvert tropes too much. I like simple, straightforward fantasy anime, like a Freelan, Witchat Atelier, Lodos, Mouse and Shidoi, Slayers, you know, Scrap Princess, Itsuki no Shaika, you know. Anyway, so yeah, let's get into things. The Golden Age of Fantasy anime. Let's watch it.
Of all the art forms,
I'll put English to Nihongo for my Japanese viewers.
to ever spring from the minds of man, there has never been a better vehicle for flights of fantasy than animation. For what is animation if not magic itself? Dead matter imbued with vivid life. Whole worlds that never were, wrought from pulped wood and baked silicone, rough clay and soft felt. It is raw imagination made manifest. So it has been since the very first cartoon was animated animated, Emile Cole's Phantasmagorie. In English, simply a fantasy. 700 frames of goofy little stick guys turning stuff into other stuff, bookended by shots of the animator's hands intended to break down the barrier between that painted world and our own. When Tolkien ushered in the age of high fantasy some 30 years later, it was only a matter of time until someone animated that. Indeed, Walt Disney himself considered adapting The Hobbit or bringing aspects of it into Fantasia just a year after its release, and over the following decades, a few other legendary animators, mostly Japanese, would take their own cracks at the material. But of course, many more took less direct inspiration from the works of Tolkien and Lewis and Le Guin, not to mention Baum, Burroughs, and Carroll.
Lodos is actually, I mean, not the most Dungeon Dragon inspired, but it's more Dungeon Dragon inspired. I mean, basically, Dungeon Dragon in the early 80s got to Japan, right? And a group of friends was playing it, and one of the guys decided to write a light novel based on like the stories, you know, that they kind of played and happened in their like fantasy Dungeon Dragon, you know, tabletop game, and that became Lodos, basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Before them, the gritty, sexy, wondrous worlds of 80s pulp fantasy in particular found themselves as at home in cell vinyl as they were on vinyl album covers. And as Japan cemented its place as the global capital of this entire medium, many such worlds would flicker into being across their airwaves and find more permanent purchase on their video rental shelves in a time and place that would eventually come to be whispered of by
Lodos again. It's so good. I was such a fan of Lodos that many years ago I bought this kind of like insane like black box of about this size. There was some kind of like 2005 Ultimate collector edition of Lodos, and there was the DVDs for like the Lodos OVAs, then the Chronicle of the Heroic Knight, which is the TV version. There was also like Legend of Mysteria, which is like some OVAs. There was also like two insane art spin-off manga, I guess I would call it. Legend of the Black Witch, I think it was called. As well as a couple other things, but it was like really something. I didn't get it for like, it wasn't new, right? It was secondhand, but I had it for many years, yeah. And I had the stuff in my Lodos collection. I had like the VHS. I had like two different versions of the OVA in VHS. I had another version of the OVA in DVD. I had like a signed VHS from the artist of the light novel of Lodos. I had a lot of stuff. I had to sell all that because money, but yeah, I really, really like Lodos. Yeah.
Otaku the world over as the peak of Western fantasy within the medium as a whole. Was it actually, though? Or are the best times still ahead of fantasy anime fanatics? Could we even perhaps be living through them right now? Yes.
I think so.
Sure, the analog aesthetic of retro anime is a bit better suited to the earthy, natural vibe you want out of high fantasy than modern digital animation. There's a reason studios have started to emulate that look in their fantasy works, and indie teams are even bringing the original techniques back. Go watch Dungeons and Television. It's free on YouTube, and it deserves a cajillion views. But aesthetics aside, the actual animation is more magical than ever. We've got Evan Call, Kevin Penkin, composers from Dark Souls and Chrono Trigger making the music. The writing and world building is built on all the successes and failures of those supposedly golden days, and there's just so much of the good stuff to go around, not to mention all the Isekai, though I understand for some people that is a huge knock against the current era, but
I mean, my take on this is that people have too much nostalgia glasses. A lot of my favorite fantasy anime are the classics, Slayers, Lodos, stuff from the 80s, 90s, right? But also as someone who's watched a stupid amount of stuff from the 80s and 90s, and a lot of the fantasy OVA of the time, you know, outside of like the big one that I just mentioned, most of those are just not that interesting. Like, you want to like them because they look awesome, But in terms of story and all that, although again, they're really not that interesting. In reality, some people are always stuck in the anime used to be better, right? There's too much anime now and too much bad anime. But I always say it like, it's such a stupid take, because by the same saying of, there's like many times more anime now, every season. So there's a lot of shit one, but there's also a lot more good one than ever, right? I mean, remember that like in the 80s and 90s, sometimes there was max 5 new shows per season. And, you have the most rose-tinted glasses if you think that like, all of them were good. Like most of the time it's a miracle if even one was good per season. So yeah, again, like, I have my own thought on Isekai, and Isekai I'll hold them back a little bit. Isekai fantasy especially. But again, like in recent year, like just this decade, Witch Atelier, Fleeland, Dungeon Meshi, I mean, with just those 3 alone, that's like 3 of the greatest, like more straightforward, like fantasy anime stories so far. Yeah.
I'll get into my own thoughts on that and the other fantasy anime that define this current period of plenty after a word from our sponsor. When you want to live out your own high fantasy adventure, they've asked their new favorite all art to get back to Japan so I can find my left. Person assessing the state of fantasy anime is, should we count Isekai? And personally, I don't see much reason not to. Traveling from one world to another is just another narrative hook after all, albeit a very versatile and overused one. But for those who do believe the golden age of fantasy anime to be long bygone, the most common complaint tends to be they used to make real fantasy anime, not all this Isekai crap. So clearly,
the problem is that fantasy is not just one thing. Fantasy is not just like the classic Dungeon and Dragon or Lord of the Rings, right? Fantasy is many things. And as much as, again, I am someone who drops 9 out of 10 Isekai and think they're absolutely terrible and how did the 7 get made, they are as much part of fantasy as the actual fantasy one.
It's not that cut and dry for everyone. And I don't think the old heads are only discounting it because their humble collection of classics like Escaflowne, Ray Earth, Dunbine, 12 Kingdoms, Fushigi.
Dunbines are dropped. It's another one where like you can see that the concept is cool, but the character and the story seem like so basic. Yeah. There's someone in the stream watching the stream? Me? What? Reyes also dropped, I tried it, but same thing, like, if you talk about this classic as that great, I mean, come on, take another look at them. I tried Dunbine, I tried Reyes, and again, the world seems interesting, but they tend to be like 50 episode anime, and from like 2 episodes in, you can tell that, the characters are extremely dry and simple, and it's gonna be extremely formulaic, without much meat, the world makes you dream, but then the show itself makes you think, man, this isn't that great.
Yugi, El Hazard, Familiar of Zero, Inuyasha, Mar and Mar.
I've actually only watched Familiar of Zero recently, which is an Isekai, by the way. Yeah. A couple months ago, I watched all of Familiar of Zero. I kind of enjoyed it. Again, I know it's often cited as like, it's not the first Isekai or anything, right? But the one that kind of created the boom, in some way. And I like it. I don't think it's like the most amazing thing or anything. There's many other Isekai I like more, but I did enjoy it.
Monster Rancher gets just absolutely mogged by all the great modern isekai. It's just not the vibe for some folks. Directly connecting your fantasy setting to the real world does highlight the unreality of the imagined one in ways that can be detrimental to the escapist immersion that we come to fantasy for. That doesn't bother me, obviously. I love isekai in general, but I don't think I'll be making any iseconverts with this video because it is, at the end of the day, just a vibes-based argument one way or another. Luckily, though, I don't have to, because back in the good old days, there just weren't that many fantasy anime, period, let alone good ones, or even finished ones if we're talking OVAs. I mean, sure, over the
amount of OVA that, again, are just like 1, 2, 3 episodes, And they seem cool, they look awesome, they have like this cool fantasy world, but again, the story is extremely basic, and they are super unfinished.
For years, they got The Slayers, Berserk, Nadia, Secret of Blue Water,
I haven't seen Nadia yet, but I really want to.
Vampire Hunter D, Dragon Quest Dino Daiboken, Dragon Half, Dragon Pink, Popolo Croix, Sorceress Stabber Orphan, Mahojin Guru Guru, Royal Space Force, all them classic Ghiblis, Scrapped Princess, FMA03, Claymore, and some other post-2.
Claymore, damn. A full Claymore adaptation, come on. That'd be awesome.
1,000 stuff, depending when exactly you stop counting.
Seleno Molibito, I forgot about that.
But today, we've got Freerin, Witch Hat Atelier, Wistoria, Wand and Sword, Sentenced to be a Hero.
Wistoria dropped. Sentenced to be a Hero I did finish recently, but I thought it started pretty great, but by the middle point, it just felt like it fell into genericness once again. You know, which I don't mind. I love generic fantasy anime, but with some more meat, if that makes sense, right?
Gachiakuta, Doro...
Gachiakuta, I dropped too. Dodo and Dodo, I've only seen season 1, but I used to read the manga. I love it.
Oh, hey Doro, Clevitas, Leviathan...
Clevitas I dropped, but the more I read about it, the more I think I should give it a second chance.
Then Seventh Prince, Demons of the Shadow...
Seventh Prince I dropped.
Around from Old Country, Bumpkin to...
I dropped.
Master Swordsman, Two Perfect Saint, Agents of the Four Seasons, The Daughter of the Demon...
This one I finished. I'm actually rewatching right now because I love it. But it's less because of the fantasy aspect, because this is the most generic possible, right? This one is just great for Moi.
Lord is too kind, 'tis time for Torture Princess, The Warrior Princess and Barbaric King, Champignon Witch, Secrets of the Silent Witch, Once Upon a Witch's Death, The Invisible Man and his soon-to-be wife, Past the Monster...
Yeah, okay, but like, for me at least, half of this I dropped. At least half of this. And it's not that they're terrible, right? But they really are like, you know, generic, but not in the good way, right? Like Lodos, Slayers, they're generic, but in a good way, in a well-portrayed way, with still some freshness, some good ideas. But like a lot of the ones listed here, I really try to like, but they feel generic in a way where like, they really won't be something to keep me watching, is what I feel watching them.
Mr. Meet Milady, and probably some other good stuff I'm forgetting, because all that is just the better than decent non-isekais without any explicit game mechanics from the last year. If we go back to just when I started my channel a decade ago, not even the start of the isekai boom, the top tier highlights alone outnumber the retro fantasies that are even watchable. I mean, back then the pickings were so slim. Record of Lodos War is considered an all-timer, and I mean, sure, it's got the vibe, it's got Best Elf, it drops a dungeon and a dragon in episode 1. The assignment was clearly understood. But as for the quality of the dungeons, they barely touched Don Machi, let alone Don Meshi, and the stories like your average D&D campaign podcast.
But that's what's interesting, and again, to me, a lot of the show listed there are literally like even worse than this Lodos, right? I love this classic Lodos for its simplicity. It generally doesn't try to do anything fresh, but you know, it's a show from like the early 90s, so for me it's fine. But then a lot of like the one he listed there, and the one that I dropped, they felt like Lodos, but in the 2020s, right? Like the same ultra simplistic character with like, you know, nothing more to them, the same super simple generic like fantasy world with all the same magic system, sword system, monsters, right? I mean, yeah, a lot of the one that he listed for me, I've only watched an episode or two of most of them, but they felt the exact same. But others forgive because we're in the 2020s, right?
But anime. The original novels sold mainly on the novelty of being Japan's first high-profile tabletop RPG replay series, and the anime's acclaim, I think, comes mainly from being darn near the only thing that took a serious attempt at scratching that particular epic high fantasy itch so directly when it came out. Berserk was a little too scary, Slayers was too funny, Dino Daiboken was... actually, that one's pretty good too.
I've tried the remake. It felt like, I know it's beloved, so I'm gonna get flamed again and someone is really gonna tell me my tastes are shit. But yeah, I really wanted to like this one, but it felt too childish. I really struggled with it. Yeah.
But now we've got ReZero, Bookworm, and Mushoku Tensei.
I like ReZero even though I'm behind. I like Mushoku Tensei, and I really like Bookworm even though I'm behind. Yeah.
And if you don't like Isekai, cool, check out Clevitas with its 3 Men and a Baby take on the Ringbearer quest, or Ranking of Kings with its deception.
Ranking of Kings is a big disappointment. I'm sorry, it starts so great, and then the second half just falls apart like no show I've ever seen. Like, I've seen bad show, but I've never seen a show that starts so great, and then just absolutely just free fall. I won't spoil anything, but it's probably like one of my biggest disappointments in, starting a show that I'm loving, and then halfway through I'm starting to hate it from like every writing decision.
Actively whimsical, politically fraught world, or Frieren with its, everything. We've got more flavors of racially diverse fairy tale world than we know what to do with these days. And that's not even getting into fairy tale, which we won't be doing. I'm not personally a huge fan, but vibes aside, I do think Mashima's writing is around the same level as Lodos, if not.
I mean, it's probably above. I'm not a big fan of fairy tale either, but again, Lodos is basic, and as part of the appeal, it's as basic as it gets, It is the most simple, straightforward fantasy story, right? I mean, I'm not the craziest fan of fairy tale, but it has a lot more going on. So the writing is definitely like, there's a lot more going on.
A little tighter, and that's kind of my point. The old school high watermark for traditional fantasy anime goodness, at least among old heads who don't know Dino Daiboken 91, is par for the course in the so-called Isekai era. If you want an action-adventure romp with that classic swords and sorcery, Dungeons and Dragons aesthetic, you are spoiled for choice. And if you're open to more exotic vibes, you've got Magi, Yona of the Dawn, the heroic legend of Arslan, FMA Brotherhood, a much more comprehensive adaptation of Hunter x Hunter than the 90s one, and, of course, the most sprawling fantasy epic of any medium or era, One Piece.
I was literally about to say, like, is he gonna list One Piece?
Of course, then we do start getting into where the line is.
That's what I was gonna say, like, that's the problem for a lot of people, and it's always the problem with, like, genre, right? Nobody knows what a fucking genre is, me included, and everybody has a different idea of what fits into a genre or not. So I think that's also part of, like, when someone says something like this, there isn't enough fantasy anime in the way I like it. What do they even mean? What is their definition of it?
Between fantasy and magical girl shonen battle type dealies, because most of them do fit into the broadest definition of fantasy, particularly urban fantasy, but they're not necessarily what you picture when some guy says, I want to watch a fantasy anime. You recommend Sailor Moon or Yu Yu Hakusho to that guy, it feels like sticking a square peg in a round hole, but then say Cardcaptor Sakura or Dragon Ball, those are a little more squirkly, and Ray Earth and Claymore are straight up perfect spheres. It's another vibe check at the end of the day. Everyone's gonna draw their line somewhere a little different, but I do think there's gotta be a line somewhere, because a maximalist definition would include My Hero Academia, and ain't no one who's craving a spot of Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings sitting down for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or WandaVision. We could get into a...
But again, that's just part of the problem of, like, boxing stuff into simple genre with, like, a single word for the description of it, right? I mean, that's why I'm often annoyed with, like, my anime list and many sites that seem to love only having a few tags, when I much prefer, like, the way Dojin tag do it most of the time, Dojin site do it most of the time, where, like, they won't stop people from having a lot of, like, very specific tags. I think that's often the problem, right? Yeah. Like, my anime list is so limited, but then I went to J-Drama. For J-Drama, there's my drama list, and it has a lot of, like, user-voted sub-tag, stuff like, village setting, countryside setting, adult, and physically strong main character, like, that level. And when you want something specific, it's so great to have tag like this, right? But again, for most anime fans, they just stick to, like, the generic word fantasy, which, like, again, it can mean so freaking much, right?
Whole Calvin's dad conversation about what urban fantasy is Percy Jackson and what's Sky High, but you kind of just know it when you see it. And even when it comes to the most fantastical of shonen adventures, I do think most people are seeing something a little different there. When folks talk about the modern fantasy anime resurgence, One Piece is almost never in that conversation, and despite being the big three anime, it's never really been a contender for the fantasy big three. Not that there's any real debate as to what those are. I don't even have to tell you what anime I'm talking about. They're the reason we're having this conversation right now, and not just in the sense that I waited for all of them to be out so that I'd have enough footage for the video. Yes, anime studios are making the most fantasy stuff they've ever made right now, and not just because they're making more anime in general. It made up 46% of all the anime released in 2024, 29% if you don't count Isekai, and even with the market getting a wee bit oversaturated, it is still the most in-demand genre of anime. In objective, purely economic terms, this is the golden age. But regardless of what the numbers say, you're not going to agree with that unless it feels like a golden age to you. And that feeling is only going to come from having a seemingly endless supply of new top-tier shit to watch. In objective, purely economic terms, the golden age of Shonen Jump, the period when the magazine saw its fastest growth and its position atop the manga market was untouchable, stretched from 1980 to 1996, the start of Dr. Slump to the end of Slam Dunk. Once Toriyama and Inoue bowed out, circulation plummeted almost immediately, and while One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach did slow the bleeding, they couldn't stop it, let alone reverse it. But if you ask the average millennial or Gen Z shonen head outside of Latin America what the golden age of Jump was, he'll almost certainly say the big three era.
But again, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, obviously, like, if you're interested in history, you're gonna look things up and be like, oh yeah, I guess the 80s was probably the big golden age in terms of like sales, 80s, early 90s. But, you know, while you might know that as like the actual fact, then there's your personal feelings, you know, like if you grew up with those three, yeah, this is your personal like peak of it. You know this anime? I think it's fine. I think it's fine. You know. And as always, you know, people like to do the childish thing of like, you know, back in my days things were way better, right? You know, your era of favorites is worse than mine, right? I mean, you've got like 50, 40 years old people saying stuff like that, you know, like it's so childish. I mean, it's totally okay, you know, for you to enjoy the stuff that you enjoyed when you were young, but come on, you don't have to put others' taste down, you know?
Because the impact of those three anime hitting Western TV back to, oh no, 4Kids, permanently changed his brain chemistry. Naruto and or Bleach gave him and all his friends their first taste of shonen, and once they started craving a second hit, Bleach and or Naruto were right there waiting for them, alongside Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King, Hitman Reborn, Death Note, and of course the older but still new to them stuff like Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho. As they got more hardcore about it, fan subs of those series and One Piece were waiting to suck them even deeper in, and no matter how deep they went, it always felt like the well of good shonen shit would never dry up. Each of those anime was great individually, but their proximity to each other elevated our perception of all of them, giving Jump's Silver Age the shine of a golden one in the West. And these anime are putting a similar shine on the current moment for fantasy. It just happens to actually line up with the numbers this time. Though, if you do actually look at those numbers, it is kind of interesting that we ended up focusing on this specific trio. Solo leveling is one of the hottest properties, not just in fantasy, but all of anime right now, yet very few people would argue it belongs in the big three.
As always, I think it's terrible. I've dropped it pretty early, but if you like it, all power to you. As always, it really doesn't matter like if people don't agree with you or have different opinion than you. Like, if you enjoyed it, good for you. I don't know what to tell you. You know, every time I say I think this show is terrible or something, like, don't take it personally, right? I mean, it's really one of those things where, like, you know, it's fine. Obviously, like, there's also an aspect you could talk about, it's actually important because, like, if I think this show is terrible but it's so popular, like, it's a bad thing because they're gonna make more like this rather than more like the one I think is good. I can understand that argument and why you would want to fight for it, but frankly, there's enough variety between, everything that I don't think you really need to go that far,
And despite garnering nearly equal success too, and way more critical acclaim than the big one of webtoons, the same goes for ReZero. Made in Abyss is an Anime of the Year winner, with a sequel coming this year that's also just not part of this conversation for some reason.
I mean, I don't really got in like some big what's the word for it? Don't see your comment? What do you mean? I was gonna say, like, I don't know what the conversation is, right? Like, if you ask me, like, the greatest, fantasy anime of these days, yeah, I would definitely include Made in Abyss. I mean, it is absolutely the peak idea of what I love from fantasy anime, right? A totally original world, totally original setting, mechanics, something that we haven't seen before, right? I mean, going deeper into an, like, giant pit with different, like, culture, world, fauna, etc., right? Like, this is what I like, You can tell me this is just one of the most original possible. Obviously, like, people are always being, over the top on their dislike of Made in Abyss, The amount of time I see someone say, like, I love Made in Abyss, but I can't recommend it to anyone because, the author is a pedo or something. It's the kind of thing that just, like, makes me roll my eyes, is all I can say. But yeah, Made in Abyss, personally, I would totally fit it. I don't know, I mean, I can see your comments, so I don't know why other people can't see them. Or maybe it's because they have it, like, they have the chat in top chat, and sometimes, like, it doesn't show comments. You need to put it in live chat. At the top left of the chat, you click and you have the option to put it in live chat. I think that happens sometime, yeah. If you leave it in top chat, it skips some comments for some reason.
So we're clearly not just selecting for the biggest audiences or the best produced adaptations here. In fact, Delicious in Dungeon barely cleared the top 20 most watched shows in the year that it released, so the audience size doesn't seem to matter that much at all. What then is the unifying element of this big three? I don't want to just say vibes again, but I do kind of think it's vibe.
Vibes and, people who really care about, like, quality, perceived quality, right? I guess that's what it is. Yeah.
They all hit a similar sweet spot with their stories and world.
By the way, I've only seen 4 episodes of Atelier. I am continuing soon.
Building, interrogating, and reinterpreting the tropes established by fantasy anime's foundational influences without fully deconstructing or subverting them. In a sea of sword and sorcery satire, video game-infused isekai, and edgy dark fantasy, these shows crucially lack the irony, self-indulgent cynicism, and more horrific undertones that can undermine the cozy, familiar Tolkien-esque atmosphere that we fantasy fans all still crave deep down. Well, in Witch Hat Atelier's case, it's more Le Guin-esque, but close.
I mean, I've seen only 4 episodes again so far of Witch Hat Atelier, and while I really like it, and I will finish season 1 on reaction, I so far wouldn't say it's close to Flea Leonard Dungeon Meshi. Maybe in visuals, sure. Like, episode 4 or 5 was insane with the dragon, like, entirely insane. But in terms of story, I don't quite know yet. I feel like it's, not quite close, but we'll see.
Enough. And that's precisely it. They're all exactly close enough. They give you the wizards and the warriors, the dungeons and the dragons, the elves and the dwarves, the quiet pastoral landscapes and the breathtaking magical vistas, all that good stuff that's captured our collective imaginations for the better part of a century since The Hobbit dropped, but without the staleness that comes from just doing a Lord of the Rings again, or Dragon Quest or Wizardry, or the overcorrections for that can lead to the high fantasy itch being left under-scratched by less orthodox works. At the same time, though, each of the big three scratches it in a meaningfully different way. Witch Hat Atelier is as epic as fantasy gets, inviting us to intimately and extensively explore its wondrous world as its heroes and villains grapple with questions and conflicts that could shake it to its very core. Frieren, in contrast, crafts a setting where such conflicts have mostly been settled, a space in which the elf and her friends can simply live their lives, which we get to observe in cozy little slices, interspersed with occasional shonen battle shenanigans as they meander through their kinda sorta quest. They're two stories of similar scale, but wildly different scope. Witch Hat using its characters as lenses to help us understand the intricacies of its world and politics through their different philosophies on—
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that part yet in the show.
on magic and morality, while Frieren's world more often holds up a mirror to its characters and prompts them and us to reflect. Then Dungeon Meshi falls somewhere in the middle, a very personal character study that never loses sight of the broader ecosystem in which it exists, a focused quest with a singular goal broken up into bite-sized chunks of food porn gag manga. Heroes of fundamentally low ambition, concerned mainly with how to make it to their next meal, who end up chewing their way one bite at a time through the very foundations of their world. It offers—
But again, I think that's part of the appeal of Dungeon Meshi, right? Like, the food aspect only is not really just it, right? It's the fact that it cares a lot about those individual monsters that a lot of them are generic, but still a lot of them aren't used that much in anime. And again, it's not just about eating them, it's about like learning about them and having like deeper, more strategic fights against them, rather than like most isekai and most bad fantasy anime, where, you know, someone just pull out a sword and just cleave in half all the monsters. In Dungeon Meshi, it's a lot more about like making enemies interesting, both in how you're going to eat them and also like how you're going to fight them in not a simple way. Yeah. Hello, Trickster. Spam.
There's a little bit of what folks like about both of the other three, plus its own distinct flavor, and most crucially, it does so in less than half the time, telling a story with the scale of one lone island, a single campaign module, yet a scope that encompasses everything. Each of the three anime complements the other two beautifully, and in doing so, they serve to collectively cultivate viewers who are fans of not just a single really good anime, but the whole genre, acting as better ambassadors for fantasy anime as a whole than Made in Abyss or ReZero or FMA or even Berserk ever could, because even though they all do very creative and worthwhile things with it, they're all built on the same classic foundation. They all scratch—
I guess now that it talks about it, yeah, I mean, it's not gonna change my opinion, but yeah, Witch Hat Atelier, Dungeon Meshi, or even Flilen, they are very family friendly and very popular fantasy, right? So that definitely helps them being taught as like that great. Now obviously they're genuinely great in almost every aspect, but then you look at Made in Abyss, and as much as I like it, yeah, now that I think about it, you know, part of why people might like have a harder time, you know, bringing it up in conversation of like, you know, this great modern fantasy anime is simply because, yeah, it's very unorthodox, right? It is the kind of fantasy anime that like, literally like creates everything about its world, its logic. It's also like much more brutal. You know, it has elements that will push the normies away, right? You know, so I guess it makes sense. While something like Flilen, I mean, I was watching like a fighter recently, like a UFC fighter, Max Holloway. I was watching like an interview, and the last thing I expected, and he's not old, right? Like he's like in his 30s, but he just started talking about Flilen, right? He was like, I'm watching that anime Flilen right now, and it's pretty cool, and I'm really enjoying it. And this is the same guy that just beats the shit out of people, you know? So it really shows, right? But Made in Abyss, yeah, I wouldn't see him watching that, right? It really shows, yeah.
the fuck out of that itch, more so even than Lodos does. Come to think of it, that's a defining feature of Shonen's big three too. Just replace Tolkien with Toriyama, and it also kind of explains the most glaring exclusions. Despite both selling better on a per volume basis than Bleach, neither Death Note nor Hunter x Hunter has ever been seriously considered for the big three, even after the 2011 remake fixed Hunter x Hunter's Western visibility problem. And I think that's because neither one of them really feels representative of that core Dragon Ball inspired shonen battle experience. Death Note rejects the action side of it, and Hunter x Hunter brutally deconstructs it. Shonen is a very broad category, so is fantasy for that matter, but when I say I want to watch a shonen anime or I feel like some fantasy, you know what I mean, and what I mean is something like the big three. That's...
But do I know what you mean? Because once again, everybody has their own understanding of the label. Like, to some people, if you tell them I want to watch a shonen anime, they're gonna think, yeah, like an action adventure. But, you know, there's also like a lot of shonen romance anime these days, right? Romantic comedy. So like, some people might think that. Okay, not most, but some might.
Why, even though this golden age has brought with it so much great isekai indulgence, lit RPG, number crunching, romantasy feels, sword and sorcery, swashbuckling, steampunk romanticism, urban fantasy thrills, and dark fantasy chills. Fuck, there's even a few good ones of those fucking things. These three have to be the big three. You know, my original intent when I started writing this video was to turn it into another Stealth 3-0 glazing sesh and make the case that that should be one of the big four, but I think I just talked myself out of it and into the inescapable conclusion that big number 4 should in fact be interspecies reviewers. I'm Jeff Thu, professional.
I mean, genuinely, if you ask me, like, it's in the same category as Made in Abyss. It is so far away from like what the normies would, you know, enjoy, right? But it is a fresh idea on a fantasy show. Like, genuinely, it's fresh, it's fun. It's basically dungeon meshi, but, you know, brutal, basically. I think Trickster can see your message. Maybe.
Man of culture, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay, well, that was interesting. I mean, I don't know if I agree with every point, but that's why this kind of video is great, because I can argue my own thing as well. All that to say, and I think the only thing that really matters in the end is that, yes, things are great, right? Yeah. Like, to see your message, so you need to change, well, people need to change the way they show the chat, basically. From talk chat to live chat. Like this. So yeah, in the end, I think the real conclusion is that, again, you know, people get to look at things a bit more objectively. Even if you don't love everything today, we are in a much better time than ever for like this kind of show, in terms of the amount of great one. So it's not a bad time. It's really not a bad time. Okay, let's watch this second video about the subject, the gamer fantasy problem. Talk Arabic, okay. I don't know if that's gonna help, but if you want.
On the last episode of Mother's Basement, Jeff Thu declared the golden age of anime to be right the f*** now. However, while he was working on that video, one thing did keep bothering him. Well, two things, actually. I hate talking about myself in the third person, and the second thing is, of course, those f***ing things. You know, there's a guy in the hero's party, he gets banished for how his inconveniently huge keeps tripping him up in fights. Right after leaving, he discovers he can blast ropes that take the head off a dragon at 50 paces. 3 to 7 gorgeous women start riding around everywhere on his dick, and either by design or by accident, he ends up trapping his former companions in the salty, hot glue of revenge before the story's through. That sort of thing. Though, the sort of thing that I just described, you know, the one with the thing, would
Remember when, what was the first one to do this? Shit, what's the name? The guy was this slave girl. The shield hero, yeah. I think it was kind of like in the mid-2010, I was the first one to do this, right? You know, my party fucked me over, so now I'm edgy. But that one was very restrained. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the Shield Hero. I think it's like fine, but at least he was restrained, right? Like, guy doesn't become an absolute psychopath. He definitely has some issues, but you know, it's more about like working through his issues. But then like some people saw that and they decided to write a version where like, no, actually, I'm just going to take revenge on all those people in the most fucked up way, and that kind of became this genre of like the, you know, revenge porn genre, I guess.
Probably be more fun than most of the actual fucking things that get made these days. There's a lot of problems to talk about regarding this oddly specific subgenre, not the least of which being how Columbine-y the whole vibe can get, but the biggest problem for my money is how video gamey the vibe tends to be as well, which, just so we're clear, Mr. Fox News, has nothing to do with the Columbine-iness of it all. Those are two separate issues, far more so than even your average isekai, where it is still very much a problem. These fucking things are absolutely lousy with RPG elements in their world building that is, for the most part, pretty lousy too. It's not impossible to build a believable lived-in world on video game logic, but
99% fail though, like, let's be honest. 99% of the isekai into a game or fantasy world with like a gaming system, they literally use it in the dumbest way possible, where like there's no real feel of like genuine progression and game balance, if you will. It's like all just randomness. Like the few example of goodness is something like Log Horizon. Like if anyone has seen Log Horizon, it's another like, you know, people trapped into a game and they have to live here forever, right? And it's a medieval fantasy, but one that actually genuinely tried to make sense, you know. But 99% of them, when they use like, you know, the leveling up, the gear system, in the anime, it's like, you know, it feels so superficial, right? They barely try to explain anything, any logic, and in the world, any kind of like consistency, right? In the end, it's like really not that different from a normal show, you know, where like the main character, even if he's level 1 versus a level 50 dragon, you know, if he believes in himself enough, he can still win. That's just like the kind of like stupid balance that they do in this kind of like game-inspired anime.
it sure is a whole lot easier to just not do that. And the problem isn't limited to stat screens. It's all the blatantly artificial video gamey tropes that come part and parcel with them, any one of which can rip you right out of an anime's world if you think about it for even a moment longer than the writer obviously did. Now, is the
Again, they never make sense. Like, it's insane. It always feels like, you know, the guy never played a video game in his life, right? That's always the feeling. Like, I'm thinking so many times, you know, like the Sword Art Online to the, you know, the gun spin-off, etc. Like, they never make any sense. Like, the rule of the games, the rule of, like, the mini-games, whatever it is. Like, it feels like someone who's never played games is trying to write this. It's insane.
ubiquity of these fucking things and Isekai in the same vein enough to make me rethink calling this a golden age? Absolutely not. There is so much good fantasy on right now with none of this gamer nonsense in it. But as a gamer who does love him some nonsense, it pains me to see just how bad most of this stuff gets. Which is why today I want to do my part to fix the problem by exploring exactly what these anime are doing wrong and how some better stories do it right. And one of the positive examples I'll be using throughout the video also happens to be one of the most exciting sponsors I have ever worked with, Chrysalis by Rhino Z. If you haven't heard me gush about it before, Chrysalis is one of my personal all-time favorite lit RPG web novels, which follows this kid named Anthony who gets reincarnated as a monster ant in this dungeon the size of a planet and slowly builds his humble colony up into a utopian global empire where every citizen gets 8 hours of sleep a night or else. The books are just a delight to read and especially listen to, carried by rock-solid action writing, sardonic Aussie wit, and more beautifully tortured ant puns than you can shake an antenna at. All of which are further enhanced by the unrivaled audiobook performances of Sound Booth Theater, who also also offer IMO the best way to get into the series through their phenomenally generous box set, which gives you the first 3 audiobooks. That's 55 hours of listening for just 1 Audible credit. As somebody who is addicted to audiobooks, it's like the best value I have ever found in the app. With the hotly anticipated latest book, Industrial Revolution, due out on Kindle July 15th, there has never been a better time to get into Chrysalis, and I was recommending this shit months before they paid me to do it, so you know I mean that. And having said that, my sponsorship obligation is now technically out of the way, so you also know that every time I reference it from now on is purely for the love of the game. And, of course, for the colony! To understand why...
I always wanted a good Ant Colony game, and I think there's multiple in development right now, as people think the idea is really cool too, yeah. Hopefully there'll be some good one.
So many modern fantasy anime are like this, you first need to understand why JRPGs are like that, which all comes back to 1981 and the releases of Ultima and Wizardry, the most influential PC RPGs of all time, especially in Japan. That might come as a surprise, since neither series saw an official release there until 1985, after homegrown games like Lizard, Mugen no Shinzo, Tower of Druaga, Hyde and Dragon Slayer had already taken root, and right before Dragon Quest would turn console RPGs into a full-blown phenomenon. But none of those games would exist in the first place if Japanese computer nerds like Yuji Horii hadn't fallen in love with import copies of Ultima and Wizardry earlier in the decade. Everything about Japan's divergent branch of the genre stems from that point. In the West, the fundamental ethos of CRPGs has always been emulate the tabletop experience with deeper character customization and eventually more role-playing options. But the Japanese never had that experience to begin with, not until TSR tried and mostly failed to bring D&D to their shores in the mid-80s when the JRPG boom was already underway. So in Japan, the ethos for designing RPGs has always been build a better Wizardry and or Ultima, which led them to more console-friendly, video game-centric innovations like action RPGs and linear cinematic narratives told through complex in-engine cutscenes much sooner than Western devs who were busy going all in on more text-heavy, player-driven stories. But Wizardry and Ultima didn't just give Japan its first taste of role-playing, they were also foundational to its entire fantasy fandom. Of course, Japan had produced plenty of fantastical films and shows in the preceding decades.
Okay, actually, I know we just started the video, but, well, just started. I need to go to the bathroom, so I'm gonna take a break right here. I need to refresh too. Again, it's like probably close to 40 today again. I can't put my fan on for you guys, so just give me 5 minutes as I refresh a bit. Coming back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for the wait. Drench my shirt in water once again. That's like the only way I'm surviving. I wouldn't say it's really, like, it doesn't keep me fresh, you know, because it gets down pretty fast, but it does, like, regulate it a little bit at least. It's better than nothing, you know. And invisible, yeah, I don't get it, so. Like, I don't know if it's you that's invisible. I think it's maybe her that has a problem with our YouTube setting.
Inspired by various mythologies and fairy tales from around the world, but as far as that medieval European capital F style of fantasy went, Lord of the Rings was translated in the 70s around the same time as Earthsea and some other influential Western epics, which did go on to inspire some important Japanese literature, most notably 1979's Gwyn Saga, a legendary light novel series that is still running today at 150 volumes.
Is it? I thought the author died, so it's an unfinished work.
And counting. But all these books were a niche within a niche at a time when genre fiction was almost entirely synonymous with science fiction to the Japanese. Aside from a few exceptions that emerged around the same time and out of the same nerdy zeitgeist as the first wave of JRPGs, swords and sorcery stuff only gained the cultural clout needed to justify, for example, making a whole mess of anime out of it after the gaming boom began, with some of the earliest hits being adaptations of Dragon Quest, Dragon Slayer, and Wizardry. While the West sees stat screens and other gaming conventions as an offshoot of the foundational works of fantasy, in Japan, games are the foundation. So when, for example, the Adventurers Inn and Gilgamesh's Tavern from Wizardry 1 were amalgamated into Patty's Party Planning Place in Dragon Quest 3, and the idea was then standardized as the Adventurers Guild by other games in need of party recruiting and questing hubs, it was only natural for fantasy books and anime to adopt the concept as well, often with very little thought put toward how such a thing might actually, work outside of a video game.
But it's definitely one of the things that doesn't bother me, like some of the way that you can bring some element of video game into this fantasy anime is with this kind of like in-world function, I guess. So stuff like Adventurers Guild, some kind of like bounty system, stuff like that. I think that's fine. Usually it's not too much of a mess in the way it's implemented in anime because they don't need to explain that much, right? It's pretty straightforward, like you have ranks, you do quests,
Now, guilds in general obviously had a place in the medieval societies that fantasy strives to emulate, but the logic that justified their existence doesn't necessarily apply to adventuring, and we know that because there were no guilds for the real-world equivalents of adventurers. In wartime, mercenary companies had very little reason to form regulatory bodies with other mercenaries they were probably going to be trying to kill next week, plus that they already had a pretty standardized apprenticeship program of here's a spear, try not to die, and in peacetime, most of them were too busy being bandits to build bureaucracies. Of course, having loads of monsters to hunt instead of killing people could potentially change that calculus, but historically speaking, hunting was the near-exclusive privilege of the nobility, in part because wild game is full of valuable resources, and in part because the hunts themselves made great murder practice for knights. Two factors that are going to be even more applicable if we're talking about magical monsters rather than deer or foxes. None of that's to say that fantasy worlds have to be 100% historically accurate. That wouldn't be very fantastic, but historical precedent is vital to crafting even the most imaginative of worlds, because history is the best model that we have for how civilizations tend to behave, and the mark of a great world builder.
But again, like, it's all a good point, and I agree, but 90% of the authors who do this kind of like gamer isekai just don't care. That's not the point. I mean, I don't want to be too mean, but it's easy to assume most of the time they don't care about something like this. They just want to make like like a self-living fantasy where they can do anything and everything works in their own way to like please the main character. That's all they want to write.
Is how well they can justify deviations from that model with good answers to tough questions. So what purpose does an Adventurers Guild serve? Not to gamers, but society. What could possibly make a state want to let essentially an independent freelance militia operate within its borders? Why would the army not be dealing with monster-related problems and reaping the associated rewards? What effect does ceding those resources and that authority to private individuals have on politics or the economy? On that note, who's even paying for all these quests in the first place? And what do they or the adventurers get out of running their monster part trades, surveying contracts, bounties, and such through these middleman organizations instead of just working with each other direct?
I mean, all these questions are stuff that are like, you just assume, right? Like, the shows never bother explaining them, but you just assume that the army are too busy like fighting war somewhere against other country. So, you know, the guilds spawn as a way to help the regular people, you know, actually get help, because what they post their poster. So like, you know, the regular people like will choose the guild because they know that the adventurer will go to the guild to get, you know, the bounties, right? And I guess the guild take a percentage or something for like, you know, handling everything. It's all the kind of stuff that you just assume, right? I mean, I don't think every series needs to explain that. It's the kind of thing that feels like almost assumed, you know?
Far too many gamer fantasies just completely ignore all that. The Adventurers Guild exists because the protagonist really needs an instant support network after getting isekai'd, or some governing body to manage the employment contract with the party that just banished him, and that's it. It's there because the story needs it there, and once it's there, it is likely to warp that entire story and the entire story's world around itself, because these guilds are just such darn useful writing tools. Can't figure out how to get your hero where they need to be for the next arc? Put it on the quest board. Need to create a sense of power progression? Give them a rank up. Need a place for them to meet a new ally or rival? Hey, the guild tavern's right there. In that way, this place that has no place within the world becomes our hero's primary point of contact with the entire civilized side of it, filtering every bit of the setting that the writer did bother fleshing out through this physical embodiment of a video game menu and giving it the same artificial aftertaste. And this isn't just detrimental to immersion, it also hamstrings storytelling, as every major player in the fantasy world is now forced to play around this blatantly video gamey, often political.
I'm really surprised with this. I never actually thought this guild as that much of a problem in the problem I have with this kind of show, but it makes some point. I don't know if I fully agree with it. I really don't think guild bother me that much as a writing device, right? Sure, it would be more interesting if there wasn't one, and it was really about like the main character going on journey, trying to make money, and just, you know, like, I don't know, going into random village and trying to see if anyone needs help, right? If you're trying to emulate like a gaming kind of thing, that's much more interesting, right? Just traveling around and trying to find quests yourself rather than just going to the guild where they just give you the quest, you know?
Inert plot device. It becomes a spanner in the gears of organic, character-driven social conflict that good world building is supposed to create, and all but forces the writer to fall back on cliched formula. Of course, it's not impossible to tell a good story around a guild. Mushoku Tensei is absolutely peak, but the guild is mostly a means to other ends there.
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't even matter most of the time. Like, yeah.
Providing funds for the actual adventures. The only part of the story that's really driven by just taking random quests off the job board is the arc where Rudy is profoundly depressed, which I think maybe says something about the emotional texture of that particular plot structure. Now, I did quite enjoy how Sentenced to be a Hero handled its Adventurers Guild, which was by basically just not having one. The organization that bears the name is really just a loosely affiliated band of thugs and killers killers working under a former pirate lord who went semi-legit. It's an explicitly amoral entity that causes problems from basically the moment it's introduced and ultimately betrays humanity in a desperate grasp for wealth and power, as one would expect a bunch of mercenaries to do. If you think about it, it's kind of weird how often adventurers' guilds are instrumental in saving the world. Now, I say that, but one of my favorite explorations of the trope, period, is in the Legend of Heroes Trails game.
Peak.
Which are in no small part about the political complications of running such an organization and the ramifications of it existing at all. Smaller countries tend to love how the guild supplements their military and police, but those organizations have their own antagonistic relationship to the civilian contractors that are taking their job, separate from public opinion or how the overall government feels. There are also bigger countries where the guild has no presence at all because the leaders see them as a threat, even though they have a strict policy of not interfering in politics. The series does so much to make this inherently fake concept feel like an organic part of a living, breathing world.
I get his point again. I get his point about the guild. But again, 90% at least of writers who will include a guild in their work, they literally don't care about any of this. Like, their interest and focus is probably something else, and I don't want to reduce it to like, it's all just like because they just want a power fantasy and this is part of like what they know. Like, some of the work is a different reason that they might not focus on the guild. But yeah, again, I mean, if we had too many work that just focused on like the logic of the guild, we'd be bored of it. But I guess, yeah, it wouldn't be bad if more work tried to put a bit more logic to their world like this.
I also think I'm a bit more inclined to like the Bracer Guild just because they don't call it an adventurer's guild. This is definitely a personal nitpick, but I find the idea of adventuring as a day job to be deeply philosophically underwhelming. It's not that I don't like stories about ordinary jobs in fantastical worlds. Drifting Dragons, Planetes, and Interspecies Reviewers are all among my favorites, but adventure definitionally has to be a break from routine. If someone is fighting monsters and exploring dungeons every single day for a living, they're not an adventurer, they're a gold farmer, or a delver, dungeoneer, mercenary, monster hunter, explorer, seeker, cave raider, bracer. Call them whatever you want, just call them literally anything else, please. Or better yet, do something else. If you've got a big dungeon in your story and absolutely need a guild to manage access to it, fine, but instead of making them a catch-all guild for every kind of dungeon explorer, maybe have them work with other guilds for mages, rogues, and warriors, buy equipment from the armorer and fletcher's guilds, and sell materials to merchants and alchemists. Or better yet, let those guilds post their own quests in their own guild halls and hand out their own rewards.
I think he's really having the problem of, I feel the same sometimes. Like, I'm not an anime essayist like him, right? But we've just watched too much shit that we almost feel like we could write better stuff. And yes, we know we're not like, we have no skills, right? Even some of the terrible work we wouldn't be able to write. But in terms of ideas of what would make something good, because we've watched so much stuff, maybe some of you are the same, I'm constantly thinking that, right? Like, you see it often in my reaction. I'm often saying, like, this would have been much better for the story, much more interesting if they did it this way or this way. It's maybe like a very presumptuous thing to say. And again, I know it's more like personal feelings than objective anything, but, there's many times where it feels like that, right? Like, you watch something, you think, like, there's a good base, but then so many decisions are, like, baffling in the way they seem like the worst writing decision that undermine the point of what they were going for. And actually, they should have done it this way or this way. I mean, this is what it feels like listening to this video, Like, this guy probably would want to write his own stuff. Yeah. And then we've seen it many times, right? Like, people like that who feel that way because they've consumed so much media and they think, it's my time has come, I'm going to make my own piece of media with all the great idea I have. And then what they make isn't actually great because it's just not that simple, right? Yeah. Maybe for making some structure like the guild, if some requests are not on territory of your country, but it might get you into trouble. Yeah.
Rewards for killing monsters outside the dungeon. You're not actually making a video game. You don't need one monolithic entity to act as your quest hub, temp agency, vocational school, and power scaling leaderboard, so all those things can be in one nested menu. Instead, try spreading those duties out to a bunch of different organizations with their own different needs, strengths, weaknesses, and this is the crucial part, reasons to with each other. Maybe the merchants don't like the thieves for self-evident reasons, or
your country is, I don't recognize the flag. Maroc, maybe? Is this game online? Which game? But none of this is game, it's anime, right?
or the mages and alchemists are competing for influence with the nobility. Perhaps the church distrusts the Delvers Union for their proximity to that obviously demonic dungeon, or maybe some bishop is just using that rhetoric as a justification to have the paladin-affiliated warrior guild take their place as dungeon gatekeepers. The more you decentralize the power structures your world is built on, the easier it is to pit them against each other and make some interesting shit happen that doesn't have to start on the job board. In Chrysalis, there is both a semi-secret society of OP dungeon crawlers called the Abyssal Legion and a separate guild of adventurers who are really just monster resource farmers and rarely make it past the top layers of the dungeon, but still think they're hot shit. The Legion has power and influence with the surface kingdoms, which it uses to heavily regulate the flow of resources in and out of the dungeon and try to stabilize its monster ecosystem, while the guild would very much like to usurp that power and milk the dungeon for all it's worth. All of which ends up coming to a head in some of the most fun and unpredictable moments of the early books. Danmachi does just have the one adventurers guild, but it's really just a mediating force between all of the different familias and the gods that lead them, who of course have their own rivalries and relationships with each other.
I'm struggling to remember if I dropped Danmachi or if I just haven't continued it. It's been so long at this point, like this thing has been going on for so many seasons, for like 10 years or something. I don't remember, I think I watched season 1 at least. I don't think I dropped it, but I just haven't continued it. I'll get back to it one day maybe.
And the adventurers under them have similar relationships, and it just creates a very messy situation where organic conflicts can naturally arise. Speaking of dungeons, though, how to do them right is really a subject that deserves its own full video essay, but if you'll permit me just one brief comment on the matter, please stop putting f***ing floor bosses in them unless your anime or book is actually set in a video game. You can have all the big cool monsters you want gating the hero's progression to the next floor, just don't call them bosses, and especially don't have them infinitely respawn so that every party trying to clear the dungeon has to fight all the exact same big cool monsters as all the other parties in the exact same order. That shit feels so boring, low stakes, and video gamey. Sword Art Online didn't even do it. Look, I'm not saying your dungeons have to be ultra realistic and devoid of game logic. The idea of a self-sustaining underground magical ecosystem is one of my favorite things about Dungeon Meshi, Made in Abyss, and Chrysalis for that matter. But if you just want to have a big evil magic hole in the ground full of monsters, puzzles, and maybe some lore, that's cool. I like those. All I'm saying is, if you're gonna make me spend a whole episode watching a guy kill a big cool monster, it should stay fucking dead. Jack of all trades, stakes of none. Boom, got him. I sat through like 8 more episodes of that show as research for this video, and I feel like I watched literally nothing. It's solo leveling minus the hype and aura. It honestly put in perspective how little of a problem stat screens and skill points really are in the grand scheme of immersion-shattering video game nonsense. Even
I think it sounds more like a personal preference of his. Like, to me, it's like, looking at the show it's showing right now, I'm guessing this is only one of its problems, you know what I mean? And for me, that would probably be that, like, down the list of things that make me think this show is super uninteresting and boring, right? So, you know, just the fact that monster respawn, that's probably like not my number one thing that makes me think this is interesting. Like just the monster itself being like just some big monster with like no personality, straightforward attack. Like that alone is already like the scene. Not that it respawns, that it's literally like just the most. It's just big monster boss. That's it. There's nothing to it, and the strategy is just survive and slash it a couple times. That's fucking boring. That's so boring. Have you watched Dungeon Meshi? This is how you do fights. There's strategy, there's learning, discovery. You don't just blast them with like one strong attack because you're a cool guy. That's what's fun about fantasy stuff, because what you can do is infinite with magic, with like different species. And yet, so many of those, it's just like big monster dude that swings a sword. And the main character just beats him by swinging his own sword a couple times. Yay, fun. Like, it's fucking fun in a game, but in an anime, it's so boring.
Without any of those things, it feels more like watching a bad Let's Play than almost any other anime, and like half the dialogue in the game they're playing is tutorials. That said, putting a video game HUD in your anime is just about the most glaringly fake thing you can do to a non-VR MMO world, and it's a big pet peeve for a lot of fantasy enthusiasts. It even bothered me back in the day when these sorts of things first started coming into vogue, except in Overlord and Slime.
I wouldn't say I never cared about it that much, but I stopped caring about it a long time ago, since most of them has never made sense, right? Like, it's the kind of thing where, like, it would make sense, for example, like, if the show, every end of the episode would, like, have a screen showing you the progress in XP or something, or in money, but all these shows that use, like, Gaming HUD, they only show it at specific moments with no consistency, no logic. And again, they themselves don't have any consistency in their world in terms of like, are you getting XP? Are you level up? So it just feels like useless because they never care about like any kind of logic, Yeah. Log Horizon, but Log Horizon is an exception. Stuck in a game tab anyway. Yeah, I mean, Log Horizon is big. It's just big, If only the author didn't commit tax evasion, we would have gotten more Log Horizon. Yeah. How can you be so smart in terms of the story you wrote and commit tax evasion? Damn it. Damn it. A true gamer, I guess. But yeah, Log Horizon is one of the few good examples. I mean, many have called it the good SAO, right? I guess, yeah, it's just great.
Because those anime are, actually good. I kind of just got used to it there very quickly, in fact, as is the case with any good anime that does such things. And while I do really like how, say, Danmachi makes its stat readouts a diegetic part of its world, I don't even think that's strictly necessary if you want to build an immersive fantasy.
What?
Setting around RPG systems like that. Ultimately, I've reached the conclusion that game UI is just another kind of signifier that tells the viewer, okay, this show's gonna be like this other show you're familiar with, in the same way as seeing a glowing aura around a muscled up martial artist, or a mage spewing particle effects out of her staff, or a dude cutting a boulder in half with a sword. It's just one of many types of magical aesthetic that some people f with, and if you use it, you just have to accept you're gonna lose all the people who don't. Most of those people do still complain about Danmachi, after all, even though it puts so much extra work into justifying the numbers on a lore level. Now, the numbers can suck all the tension and strategy out of fights by objectively confirming that Protag-kun is in fact stronger than the guy he's fighting and doesn't have to worry about anything, but yeah, that's just as true of power levels in shonen. By the same token, choosing skills and spells from a drop-down menu does kinda demystify your fantasy world, but not significantly more than any other kind of hard magic system does once the rules are fully explained. It just has that effect quicker because anyone who's played a video game before has a head start on understanding those rules, which also means they have a head start on getting to the fun theory crafting, power scaling stage of enjoying those rules. So it is definitely ultimately a trade-off on your fantasy world's overall level of immersion, but it has some serious upsides. Part of the reason that gamer isekai, those fucking things, and lit RPGs are so addictive and share so many fans between each other is because so much knowledge is transferable from series to series. As soon as you finish one, you can jump right into another and get more of what you were enjoying on at least a basic level. Problems only really arise when a story fails to move past that basic level and just gives you yet another guy who's really strong and fast and good at everything because his numbers are so big. That's all fine and dandy for baby's first lit RPG, but as soon as you get a taste for the harder stuff, it loses its appeal. The best gamer fiction uses that shared knowledge pool as a jumping off point for dreaming up hyper-specific builds and weird, broken, synergistic skill sets that could never exist in a real game because it needs to be balanced, and it would be too hard for new players to understand. In shonen power system terms, it lets you jump right into coming up with part 5 and 6 level stand concepts without having to lay the groundwork of parts 3 and 4 first. And those systems succeed or fail by a lot of the same metrics as a shonen power system.
Oh yeah, I forgot about this. I mean, stuff like this too, like seriously. I reincarnated into, well, I got isekai'd, but I still have fucking Amazon. And so I'm a cook that cheats by just ordering stuff from the real world. Like this fucking show. Seriously.
So long as the skill sets or spell lists or what have you are tailored to reflect the main character's personalities and their foes challenge them to use their powers in interesting and creative ways that the viewer or reader is able to follow and anticipate by paying attention, they're probably going to have a fun time, and that's all you really need. You can, of course, go further with it in the same way that shonen like Hunter x Hunter or Jujutsu Kaisen can integrate their power systems much more deeply into their settings and themes. So I'm a Spider, so what has a whole religion that worships the skill system, which is a fun, logical extrapolation of what might happen if everyone in the world had a magic voice in their head that gave them magic powers. Chrysalis takes the idea several steps further with multiple dungeon-worshipping sects and cults split by vehement, dogmatic disagreements on optimal build strategies and the ethics of EXP farming. But all of that is just meat. So long as the gravy's tasty, folks will eat your gamer slop right up. For the tastiest possible gravy, though, it is best to add a little bit of visual spice.
And again, like, nothing wrong with liking any of this show that, you know, we're describing as subpar or something. Like, I used to be the biggest Sword Art Online fan. Like, when I first watched it in 2012, I was like 14, and it was the coolest shit. I literally watched it like 3 or 4 times in a single week because I liked it so much, and I so wanted to be that guy that gets trapped into a game and is a cool guy and gets the girl, because the fantasy is there, right? Like, if you're a young, stupid teen, all of this kind of stupid-ass show would appeal to you. Like, all of the show that I dropped today, many of them I would have actually loved when I was younger, right? And it's fine. It's totally fine, right? I mean, it's fine. Like what you like, you know.
Aside from making it play boring, I think the worst thing you can possibly do to your fake game is make it look boring. And holy shit, do a whole lot of gamer fantasy anime ever look like Excel spreadsheets and default RPG Maker templates. Just a teensy bit of UI design in your menus can go a long way, and you can go a whole lot further with that design because, of course, nobody actually has to interact with them. I think my all-time least defensible nitpick of Sword Art Online has gotta be saying that the menus should have been thought controlled. Nah, those drop-down touch interfaces are absolutely fire. It is...
Yeah, this is actually pretty cool. Now that I think about it.
It's never not fun watching Kirito flick through a menu, which is more than I can say for watching Kirito.
Cat GPT. Meow. What do you want me to generate?
toe fight. In many cases, game UI also comes part and parcel with flavor text and system voices, which can do just as much, if not more so, to kill the fun if they read/sound boring. Far too many anime, web, and light novel writers treat those aspects as an excuse to fill some time with dry, repetitive, low-effort technical descriptions when they should be using them as an opportunity to inject some extra flavor and personality into
I think Slime does a good job at that.
their worlds. I don't think it's controversial to call the AI from Dungeon Crawler Carl the definitive example of how to make the system's voice a compelling character in its own right. Its sadistic game show host personality and not at all disguised fetishes imbue every item and skill description with delightfully dark humor from the word go, and the gradual unraveling of its psyche is one of the series' most compelling subplots. It makes every new item and skill we discover feel as rewarding for the reader as it does to the characters, and that being my intro into the genre, did kind of set me up for disappointment with almost every other lit RPG audiobook I've tried, but thankfully, Chrysalis wasn't one of them, and that was one of the first things that really sucked me into it. It makes it clear very early on that the system voice, Gandalf, is a dude with his own agenda that may or may not line up with Anthony's, and while it doesn't quite have that same laugh-out-loud factor as the system AI, it is still very rewarding every time Anthony unlocks one of the full monster profiles with design notes from Gandalf that reveal more about his plans and personalities. And the full-on conversations he gets to have with Gandalf whenever he evolves are a brilliant way of tying milestones in Anthony's power progression to some of the story's most interesting lore reveals. Low-key, one of my favorite things about this season's The Strongest Job is apparently not a hero or a sage, but an appraiser provisional, is how it handles Protag's support voice.
I am very extremely prejudiced. I mean, just listening to that name makes me want to just not even try it.
Sapo-chan, who gradually evolves from a neutral exposition dispenser into a proper character over the early episodes. I also really like how it mixes things up by having the gods speak directly into his brain, a conceit the show frequently mines for comedy gold. You don't have to go the funny route with this, though. You can also make it a little scary, like roll over and die, or put some Dark Souls-y lore tidbits and mystery breadcrumbs in your descriptions. I just need some reason to care. If you can't make your system voice at least as entertaining as a Pokedex, your story's probably better off without it, in much the same way that it's almost certainly better off without an Adventurer's Guild. At the end of the day, though, even that is a matter of how you use it. Game elements are narrative tools, just like any other trope, that serve to streamline some aspects of storytelling while restricting others. The key is understanding their utility and limitations and making them work for the story you want to tell instead of against it. If you are a storyteller, then I hope this video helps you do exactly that.
Okay, definitely interesting. Like, I love this kind of video because I don't agree with everything, right? I mean, you know, but at the same time, it's a good showcase of like how we all have specific nitpick that, you know, make us absolutely go off the handle. Personally, like, as I said, the guild thing, when I get this point, and obviously I would love more anime caring more about, you know, like, it's not just for the guild, right? Like, what it described as like all the thought into making a guild interesting should go into every other aspect, right? Which is the problem. It's not just like a guild, right? It's every other aspect of your world and how it functions that should have the same level of thoughts going into it to make it interesting and not generic. You know, but again, I'd never thought about that before, you know, like, as guild being such a problem, it never really bothered me, but I can see the point, you know, I can see the point. Like, being given quest kind of takes the adventure out of the adventure, right? Like, through like this centralized system, you know, not happening upon a quest by traveling. That's less interesting, yeah. So yeah, some very interesting point in this one. Good video. Next, we have the problem with Isekai, to continue on this subject and wrap up the subject.
Isekai has a bit of a bum rap. I know quite a few anime enthusiasts who won't even look at a show if there's so much as a whiff of truck-kun or cheat powers, and honestly, I can't say I blame them. Speaking as someone who's watched most isekai are terrible, notably worse at a notably higher frequency than basically any other genre of anime. And
I didn't think about it before, but absolutely true, yeah. I often, talk about it, but for the last 10 years, I try to give a try to almost every show, every season. Now, obviously, I won't watch most of them, because most of them I drop at episode 1. And, it's still crazy to me that, like, even today, in the current seasons, there's still, like, often up to 10 isekai. And I'm not even talking about, like, good one, I'm talking about, like, I've reincarnated as a vending machine, or, I've reincarnated and I'm the strongest guy who is going to take revenge on everybody. And they all have the most generic, uninspired fantasy world, the most edgy, uninteresting main character, and they all feel like the exact same, written by the same person. They also all have, like, most of the time, terrible production value, right? They look like shit, they look indistinct. Yeah, I mean, it's really something. Yeah, and again, the fact that still so many are being made is that a lot of people are enjoying them, and all power to you if you're enjoying them. It's good. I don't hate you for enjoying them, but for me, it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm always shocked, again, like, by how many there is every season, and how much are, like, they're not even just bad, they're like, how did this even get made, is all I can think about.
that's speaking as someone who's also watched most harems. A sizable portion of the isekai audience will slurp up any old slop so long as it stars a nerd from Earth like them with a non-zero chance of pulling some elf eventually.
But again, like, by the same description, you could say that about me about moe anime. It's not fully true. I do drop some, but I do watch 90% of them. The better one, the less better one, right? But that is me with moe anime. I never get tired of them, and even the lesser one I enjoy. Though at the same time, I would argue that even the lesser moe anime that I enjoy are still, like, miles above some of this terrible isekai, but it's a dumb argument.
In like 30 seasons or so. And I really do mean any old slop. The lowest rated isekai in any given season will almost always pull higher viewership numbers than the best original anime of any given year. As you might recall from my worst of 2024 list, Failure Frame is an isekai in which literally every fight scene is just
Poison. Poison. Poison.
Like the Australian.
over and over and paralyze and poison until you just want to make out with a P320. And it has a 4.4 out of 5 on Crunchyroll with 85,000 ratings. For context, Apocalypse Hotel, the best...
Oh, that's such a good show. Highly recommend it. If you haven't thought about it, you probably haven't. Such a good show. Yeah, love the concept. Evolve type shit, what we gather to communicate between same species.
Anime of 2025 so far has barely 4,000. That's 1,000 less than Ugly Mug Epic Fighter, an isekai that looks like this and is called Ugly Mug Epic Fighter.
But the fat guy is funny. Haha. Ha ha ha. Yes.
Some of y'all really will watch fucking anything, and the anime industry is more than happy to give it to you, but
again, I think it's part of marketing, right? Like, all this trashy light novel title anime, like Fat Guy Isekai, if you want to call it that, like, someone is gonna look at the title and be like, that sounds funny, let me watch it. But Apocalypse Hotel, it just doesn't tell you much, right? Even though it's such an amazing show, it's about, like, an autonomous nurse. Humanity has basically disappeared, and there's this robot caretaker that was left behind with a couple other like robots trying to, like, maintain it for the day any human return. It's a really beautiful show, but again, I guess the name Apocalypse Hotel doesn't tell you much. While as much as I hate light novel titles, for a lot of people, that's what they want, like a title that tells them everything this is, and so they can just jump in. Yeah, I guess so.
That's not the problem with Isekai, at least not the one that any of us can do anything about, so not worth making a video about. I can't stop everyone else from watching bad anime, but I can at least help you watch some better ones. Because there is one crucial factor that every good Isekai gets.
The young come back to the world. Oh, Isekai Oji-san. Yeah, Isekai Oji-san was funny.
That's right, and almost every bad one gets wrong. Something that anyone writing an isekai should keep in mind if they want any chance of it being halfway decent, and anyone watching isekai should keep an eye out for much the same reason. It's so important, you can use it to clock if an isekai is worth watching and...
I disagree, sir. I totally disagree. I think that 80s, 90s, 2000s art style were amazing, but I never agree with this kind of take. I think there's so many absolutely insane looking anime today too. Sure, they're like buried in the middle of like so many bad ones, right? So it's kind of like you have a trash can and there's a bunch of like rotten fish, but if you dig, you suddenly found like a diamond. You know what I mean? Well, back then it was like in your trash can there's like 3 rotten fish and 3 diamonds, so it's like much easier to see them, right? But today there's like 50 rotten fish and 10 diamonds. Does that make sense? I think that's really what it is. And I understand that most people, obviously, because of that, they don't have time to take the time to like shift through all the garbage to find the diamond. You know, I get it. I get it. And then that kind of become the popular opinion, right? Like, you know, yeah.
Just one episode. And I'm gonna tell you exactly what that problem with modern isekai is after I solve the problem with my rent this month. This video is brought to you by
Alright, I'll pass the sponsor.
Live Rose. There are in own languages. So whether you love K-dramas or telenovelas or the French kind of anime, they've got you covered. Click that link to...
I don't even know what this is. The only French anime I know is called Yoko. That's it.
To start learning today. Now, there are quite a lot of isekai with quite a lot of things wrong with them, from flat, boring power curves to altogether too many villains who turn out to be
Rapists! That's right!
to several what one might call tacit endorsements of slavery, but not...
I wouldn't mind the rapist villains if they were, you know, like, not just one-shotted every time. I mean, I understand, like, you know, it's always like the baby level kind of portrayal or something like that, right? Rapist is so bad that he's a bitch, so he gets killed in one attack. But then the trope becomes that every time. And so it becomes such a trope that like there's no interesting aspect of it. And obviously we're not even talking about like the representation of rape in this kind of shows being used as like the most cheap thing with like no interesting exploration of the subject. But yeah.
None of these problems
You don't
are
watch anime?
the problem. The power curve thing is a pretty big problem, to the point I made a whole other video about it, but plenty of isekai don't completely dunk that up and still manage to suck butts. And a few that basically disregard it entirely still turned out pretty awesome. Figuring out if a power system is interesting and satisfying to progress through can also take several episodes. Sometimes so many you don't even realize there is a power system until like season 2. And
Which is why I absolutely love, like, the best isekai, the best bad isekai for me is the one that within the first 5 minutes have shown me the most bland character, that is so overpowered, is just like kill the dragon in one shot, so I can drop it instantly. That's the best isekai, the best bad isekai for me. Like the one that don't waste my time, they tell me right away that they have no intention of like making anything interesting and I can just dip out. No waste of time.
I did promise you a litmus test that could judge isekai in one episode or less. The root of the problem lies at the very core of the isekai concept. A story about a person from a world, usually this one, being transported to a cool new world. Basically every isekai author has that second part covered, or at least tries to. I'm sure their moms think their worlds are cool. It's the first part that really trips them up, if they even think about it at all. Because isekai aren't just stories about cool worlds. We already have a word for those: fantasy. Isekai are stories about people from worlds. Usually...
Which means that most of the time the trope ends up being the guy is totally happy to be isekai'd and stops giving a shit 2 minutes in about going back. And so the isekai aspect instantly dies because the guy just doesn't care. Like, he's like, yeah, fantasy world, let's go. Like, where it's interesting is when the characters are like, you know, maybe they actually had a good life in real life, and they want to go back, and they're also like terrified in this world because they don't actually have powers to one-shot stuff. I mean, anybody remembers Grimgar? It's from a long time ago, but it was, like a bunch of people into fantasy isekai, and most of the 12th episode was them being like absolutely terrified, dying to even like simple goblin, and most of the early 12 episode was like them just trying to like survive with the hope of maybe finding a way back, but also again like just fighting goblins because just goblins were like such a big threat, you know, in a matter of life and death, and that makes it so much more interesting, right? I mean, you know, I think there's some fine example, right? Like something like Mushoku Tensei is pretty interesting despite doing this thing where the guy is fine with being isekai, right? But it's because it sees it as like a second chance, right? It's still very much tied to who he was as a real life person and how he wants to improve himself. But then you have like, why am I saying nothing? Well, thank you. I guess my takes are shit, I guess. Great. I'm sure that's not what you meant. But yeah, again, like the litany of this kind of character was like instantly happy to be isekai, and so it kind of like kills the point of it. Why not just make like a normal character living inside the world already and just going into a personal adventure? Like, it's so stupid. Yeah. Never seen a basement in person. Really? That's something.
This one. Far too many fantasy light novel writers see that as little more than a cheat code for creating relatability. The isekai concept does easily facilitate the creation of fantasy heroes who are just like me for real without actually having...
Isekai authors are more into JRPG than fantasy work. Maybe, yeah. I enjoyed how in the first episode we introduced to a new MC just to see another girl and a demon a couple minutes later.
To explain how that kind of guy could come to exist in 14th century Europe or whatever. You want to pad out some generic Tolkien-esque fluff with an endless stream of game and anime references where the protagonist's personality ought to be? Just pluck some nerd off the Tokyo pavement, pop him down in the starting town with one or more waifus, and watch him go. On that note, making your story an isekai also has a lot of structural advantages, not the least of which being you don't have to figure out how to get your protagonist to where the story starts. Just
sure. And also like one of the points is, you know, again, a lazy writing thing, right? With an isekai protagonist, the main character knows nothing, and so you can have every other character explain everything. I think we all know how much harder it is to, like, I do respect authors who do it, you know, create a fantasy world where like you follow a character that's already been living there, so it knows things. So like you still have to do exposition for the audience, but you have to try to do it in a way that doesn't feel cheap. It's all very interesting, yeah.
Truck, bam, now he's there. He probably doesn't know fuck all about the world he just dropped into either, giving him the perfect excuse to act.
Convinced that show got so much acclaim just because it's a modern fantasy show that isn't isekai. I mean, that's part of it, but it's just freaking great, yeah. Building working fantasy world is more pain in the ass than just take some RPG and make an anime from that. Sure.
Ask anyone he meets for an exposition dump. And that's on top of all the free dumping you get to do in the scene where he meets his isekai travel agent.
Just wondering, won't I have to learn this world's language?
Details, schmeetails, just hurry it up already. I've got loads more dead humans to guide besides you, you know.
The portal fantasy trope is an undeniably versatile tool for kickstarting a quick and dirty escapist fantasy quest, but it's so much more than that. Fully half the premise of this genre. What makes isekai interesting, what sets it apart from regular fantasy, is the inherent conflict, the clash of perspectives, ideals, worldviews that comes with suddenly immersing a person in a totally foreign place, time, and jurisdiction jurisdiction of the laws of physics. How does that change someone? How would the world change in response to them? How does the new world compare to the old one? These are deep wells of thematic potential, opportunities for profound commentary on the world we live in and the people who live in it that most isekai writers completely ignore. Well,
because they don't care. Again, for them it's just a power fantasy, right? They just hate the world, but they still like it enough to write a light novel, and so they just want a light novel where like they write about a cool guy who's often self-insert, who gets teleported into fantasy world and is a cool guy. That's it. Like, of course they don't care about any kind of deep writing like this. It's a self-insert fantasy for them, which then becomes a self-insert fantasy for like people watching, you know? Yeah.
Okay, not completely. The new world is better because it's more like a video game, unless it's a hard video game with lots of blood and guts, in which case it's better with an asterisk. That world changes the protagonist from an incel into a guy who's had his dick sucked by an elf, and he changes it in turn by setting a new bar for how many elves can suck one guy's dick. Sorry,
Indeed.
spoilers for, it's probably easier to just list the isekai that doesn't spoil, and that's precisely what makes...
I mean, actually probably none, because most of the time no one bangs. I mean, they always portray it as like, the guy is free in this new world, he can kill people, do a lot of cool stuff, but every time he's about to bang someone, something stops him and, no, we can't do that, right? I guess it's part of maybe the decency or censorship of Japan work, but it's really interesting, yeah. Most of the time, like, all of this work are really horny, but they very rarely cross the line, despite the fact they would make so much sense, right? The guy is isekai, he loves the world, he gets a bunch of waifus, and yet, nothing happens. It's, one of the things that's part of, like, maybe like holding back aspect,
makes all the ones it does so fundamentally worthless, at least after you've watched your first 1 or 20. Don't get me twisted, there is obvious value in raw escapist fantasy, a lot of stuff worth escaping on this bitch of a late capitalist earth, but it's the exact same flavor of value over and over and paralyze.
The one guy who tried making a fantasy story but made the economy so accurate to medieval time that the protagonist couldn't actually go on the adventure because they're broke. Damn. But I mean, that sounds super interesting. Then he has to find a way to like game the economy.
And poison until all you can taste is slop. And maybe that's all you need. Maybe you just want to feel numb for 20 minutes a week. That is very valid. But aside from that, past a certain point of diminishing returns, you gotta be a real weirdo who delights in watching other weirdos loudly tell on themselves through fiction to get anything out of watching more slop isekai. And most people are not me, which is why I've devised an elegant litmus test to identify and avoid the slop. After watching 1 or 2 episodes of a new isekai, all you gotta do is ask yourself, what was the hero's original world?
I'm sorry, but like, I'm gonna be much harsher. You don't need an episode or 2. Like, very often I drop like within episode 1, and some people will say it's way too harsh, and I'm not genuinely giving a chance to something, but come on. I think part of it, for my defense, I've just watched a lot of anime, right? So I guess I have a better, faster idea of like if something is gonna suck. And I'm not saying it's like 100% accurate. I always talk about it, but every season I drop like 80% of the shows or something because they seem terrible. And you could say that as out of this 80%, there might have been a few shows that I would have actually liked if I watched more of them. But I think it's still pretty accurate, this method. And obviously, again, it comes from experience, right? Having tried so many shows over like so many years. And, back in the day, actually watching to completion many terrible shows that I disliked. For me, like, again, most shows in 5-10 minutes, I've seen enough. I mean, especially when you consider, like, for me, it's something I think is very important. It doesn't apply to every show. Someone's gonna say like Madoka Magica or something, but most shows, if they don't try to show their best in episode 1, whereas when you're supposed to grab a viewer, like, whatever is the point, right? So like all of this terrible isekai, within 5 minutes, you have the most generic character, the most generic fantasy world, the main character like in 5 minutes already one-shotting like strong enemies or something. It's more than enough to like make a judgment call that it's not worth watching. And obviously, again, some people are gonna say there's some example of like, you know, a Majoka Magica which only gets revealed itself after like 3 episodes, or like some parody anime that will open the episode by like being very generic and then turning into something that's actually a parody and fun. But again, I'm not saying like my way of doing it is perfect, but it's still like saving me a lot of time than actually giving 3 episode rules or something. Especially with Isekai, I mean, I guess I am a racist toward Isekai. I am proud of it, and you know, there's some good one. Okay, I stopped that joke, it's getting kind of fucked up. This isn't what I wanted to say. What was I trying to say? That, yeah, again, like, I've, Mamusume, wait, what did I not read? You always can use plot armor for that, finding unexpected gold or something else like this for starting journey. Wait, do I know everything? Mamusume, especially episode 1. Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, again, you know, for me, again, I think like once you've seen enough of a genre, you know, 5-10 minutes can be enough. And I'm not saying like I have a number like that. Every show I will give it different amount of time, you know, waiting for like something to really grab me. But yeah, that's my take. In my neuro brain, no wonder I know everything. I mean, beep beep beep. Yes, indeed. I don't know. Yeah, it's just especially with Isekai. I think with other genre, like, you know, which can be more varied, sometimes it takes a bit more time to really figure out if the show is gonna be good, but
like, and how did they fit into it? If the show gave you answers, or at least enough clues to speculate, you're probably watching something with something to say. At least something more than, what if you lived in a video game? That doesn't guarantee that what it has to say will be good or interesting. Failure Frame uses a whole mess of backstory just to say, what if you lived in a shitty gacha game and also were a school shooter? But at the very least, you know that the hero being from another world is going to matter to the story at least a little bit on some level. Yes, that's how low the bar is. But the sky is the limit for the shows that do clear it.
Can I really believe that the people I care about also care for me?
I probably shouldn't turn.
I don't know if I would call it that, because it's like Musashi or Pico are from like history technically, so it's not like Isekai is a different world, right? But I don't think there's another term for it, so maybe Isekai fits, yeah? If you consider like jumping to a different part of history, you know, a different world, I guess. I mean, for them it would be, yeah, so I'm just saying, yeah, I guess you could say it as a bit of Isekai. Maybe. Frankly, at some point, you know, Itagaki is gonna run out of in the world idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if he started doing something like that, yeah, like literally, I don't know, bringing aliens to fight Baki characters, or actually Isekai or something. I could see that. One day he's gonna run out of ideas.
Turn 2 of these things in a row into Stealth ReZero glazing sessions, especially not in the same calendar year, but ReZero is one of the best examples out there.
I don't remember Retsu Isekai.
Of a character fundamentally changed by his journey to another world. When he arrives in Lagunica, Natsuki Subaru is a hot mess. And while we are only given the briefest glimpse of his life on Earth before he's torn away from it, it tells us quite a lot about him. He's the kind of guy who reads Jump in the Konbini without actually buying it. The kind of guy who knows he should be eating miso natto cup noodles but gets tonkatsu instead, plus some chips, because fuck it. But also, he is the kind of guy with the presence of mind to catch a rare coin in his change and hold on.
I really don't remember that. I guess it's the kind of thing that, like, in the midst of all the madness of Baki, yeah, it just slipped my mind. Alright, I don't remember that.
to it. His eyes especially tell us so much about him. First, with the way they follow that couple walking by in their school uniforms, then dart back to his sad, single tracksuit encrusted hikikomori ass, expressing a lifetime of self-hatred with one glance and a sigh. Then there's the way those eyes light up when he realizes he's been isekai'd. He wants this. He needs it. There is clearly something he hates about life back on Earth, and we don't know what that.
I mean, again, Resolo is not my favorite, and I'm some season behind, but it's a good one. You know, the protagonist, you know, what he acts like he wants to be there at first, they actually give, like, you know, they don't make him overpowered, even though you might say rewinding time is overpowered, but, like, there's consequences, right? I mean, the guy has to bear the pain every time, gets more mental trauma. Like, this is the kind of good isekai that, again, the character is a character up there, not just to be the coolest, strongest guy without any trials or tribulation, right? This is one of the good ones. I mean, Mushoku Tensei, as always, you know, I think even more interesting because the main character is a piece of shit by many, like by most people's accounts, I would say, right? And you know, there's so much like that you can talk about and argue about the story, right? Like, does this guy even deserve a second chance? Whatever he does in this new life, does it, like, what does it mean, right? Even if he becomes a good person, etc., etc. Like, there's so much more interesting meat to the show if the main character isn't just there and like what happy to be there and so strong, you know. So Re:Zero, Mushoku Tensei, like those are some of the good examples, definitely. The genre is like, again, there can be some good one. It really doesn't take much, but most authors like always get stuck on, you know, like the power fantasy of the guy Isekai is so happy to be here and he's the strongest guy, and that's about it. Like, there's nothing more to it, you know.
That is yet. Subaru desperately does not want to think about it, so it will be many episodes before we finally get around to unpacking why exactly he is like this. But it's enough to know that the writer has an answer to that question. Chotomate a sec there, though. Didn't I just get done complaining that the only way most writers use isekai is to insert an earth nerd into striking range of some elf pussy? Is Re:Zero not a prototypical example of that? Sure, a lot.
I mean, generic doesn't mean bad, as I always say. It's fine, because, you know, if the characters are interesting, it's fine. Like, the trope is there, but the trope is expanded beyond the base of it.
Of Subaru's early characterization is the same sort of self-aware, genre-savvy, reference-spouting anti-swagger we've seen from a billion other Kiritos before. But the key difference is that Subaru is savvy to the wrong genre, stuck in a much darker horror fantasy type thing where his nerd quips are painfully out of place, and so, frequently, are his organs and limbs. Far more important than just doing something different with its otaku protag, though, Re:Zero actually bothers to define who he is with more than that one word, and to explore what life was like for him back on Earth when he wasn't watching anime and playing video games. There's depth.
Felix quit being a fanboy, okay. And Subaru is a fanboy. Again, I'm not catched up to the show, so I have no context. But great. First anime Pokemon? I thought you said Dragon Ball.
There. Space for an actual character arc. Slop isekai heroes have character development. Your average Kirito will probably get a little more confident as his stats go up and maybe, like, learn to be slightly more responsible and less lazy or whatever, but they never have character arcs because it's impossible to draw an arc if all you know is where it ends. You need a fixed starting point with a clearly defined trajectory. And by treating the Portal fantasy as nothing but a cheat code to spawn a backstory-free audience insert for their regular, boring gamelit thing that frankly didn't need to be an isekai in the first place, all of these anime and manga and light novels sacrifice their ability to create that point. Now, of course, there are other areas where these isekai can still excel. They can have a solid plot, an interesting and immersive setting, or some quality waifus. But, I mean, they immediately really set themselves way back in the waifu department by making the main guy those waifus are going to interact with a pair of pants, which also affects the non-waifu characters if the anime
It's not your real name, okay?
decides to have those. And it kind of doesn't matter how fraught your world's political situation gets, how crazy the magic system is, or how deep the lore is, if the people living in it don't feel real. So that's a massive uphill battle, even for a really good writer. And let's be honest, there's not a lot of those working in this space. It's not impossible, though. This season's The Water Magician has a very strong supporting cast who even get to save the day all by themselves while Protag's busy risen up the elf pussy in the library. The Adventurers Guild that they're part of.
I quit being crushed tonight since Subaru will get his position. Okay, that's sad. That's really sad.
Has a fleshed out bureaucracy behind it, and its operations are subject to the whims of other political forces within the kingdom, not to mention economic forces. There's a whole plot point where fetch quests start drying up because the market's glutted with
But didn't you say Emma before?
monster parts. There are other kingdoms too that we have to worry about, plus a presumably evil empire with a really dumb name.
他の2つはデブヒ帝国とハンダルー諸国連合だ。
デブヒ
帝国に何か
Debu means fat.
嫌な思い出でもあるのか
Is this some kind of pun, like Debu fat? Bui means, like Bui is kind of like the sound that pig make. Pig fat. Debui, fat pig. Bui. Is that a stupid ass pun?
名前がかっこ悪い
The world generally feels alive and like it keeps existing when Protag-kun isn't looking directly at it, which is a very good thing because Ryo is easily the weakest link in his own story. He's not awful, to be clear. He's got some fun quirks like being irritated by dumb-sounding fantasy names and even some well-defined personality traits that synergize with the rest of the cast. The show takes its time giving him chances to flex and get elf pussy too, which makes it all the more satisfying when he finally does. And while he is yet another crazy overpowered silent casting battle mage, at least there's a specific
I won't lie, he's not really selling me on this. I think this is the anime essay channel fallacy, right? He kind of needs to watch everything. So even in a terrible show, he tries to find some solace to not go insane, right? Because none of this sounds very interesting, and it looks even less interesting.
Theme to his silent casted magic that allows for some creative choreography and gives the show's action a unique identity. As pants go, Ryo is very well tailored with some fancy embellishments, but at the end of the day, he's still pants. We have no idea where he came from or why he is who he is. What did he go through on Earth to make him want to live alone in the middle of nowhere for years? Does he miss anyone back home? Do they miss him? Besides magic and sword fighting, what is he good at? What were his...
Again, he's missing a point, I feel like, self-insert. Like, part of the reason is not always just the writer is stupid. This is part of it. You make the most bland, generic character and you don't tie him to a backstory. And it's not the same as a game self-insert, but you can't tell me that there isn't a lot of like people, and especially a young teen, who would watch a show like this and kind of self-insert as the protagonist. And so it's much easier when the protagonist is like, you know, he's so generic and he has no backstory. That's part of it.
Interests and hobbies, his personal goals. No matter how much time we spend with him, we never really learn anything more about him and what motivates him, which leaves this gaping hole in the story that only grows with each passing episode. And that hole doesn't need to be there because, like many modern isekai, the Water Magician doesn't need to be an isekai. The only thing that Ryo being from Earth really does for the story that couldn't be accomplished by just making him a weird guy.
Self-insert, again.
who grew up in the middle of nowhere is explain how he knows what water molecules are, which does make his magic more powerful, so that's kind of important. But also you could like come up with an ancient civilization or a million other ways to explain that to him. And if he were native to this world, then the necessary explanations for how he ended up living in no man's land, how he discovered and learned his distinct form of magic, and so on, would all create opportunities to expand and ground his character. Secrets of the Silent Witch, also from this season, is a prime example of how much a fantasy story about an overpowered silent casting mage stands to gain by just having the courage to not be an isekai. And it makes a great point of contrast because, like the Water Magician, it has an interesting, politically complex, lore-rich world and a huge cast of thoroughly entertaining characters. So we can see just how much making the protagonist an actual character adds to that. Monica Everett's OP incantation-free magic isn't just an isekai cheat power, it's rooted in her love of math, which is all that she has left from her dead father, and the crippling anxiety that makes her incapable of...
I mean, sometime, yeah, sometime. I guess you're right. Huh? I reincarnated, but you know, I used to be an economist, an appraiser, a cook, yeah. I guess I have nothing. I am nothing. I have no skills. I reincarnated into an isekai, and I have watched many anime. How can I use my skill of having watched many anime in an isekai? I'm sure it's gonna help me. I'm sure I'm gonna survive.
Saying spells out loud, which is itself the result of being taken in by an abusive uncle at a young age. She also has an entire academic career behind her, peers who really respect her.
Okay, he's actually selling me on this one. I should give it another try. I'm always open to be sold on a show I dropped.
Co-workers at her current government job who give her a hard time. A full life lived prior to the start of the story, which we slowly uncover through flashbacks and other emotional beats that would just be boring downtime in something like The Water Magician. But the effect isn't just additive, it's multiplicative, because that extra side of the story interacts with all the other sides. Monica's past adds context and weight to her present development, allowing moments like making her first friend, discovering a passion outside of magic, and speaking up for herself for the first time to hit harder because we understand how hard those things are for her. It also lets her relate to the other characters and what they're going through on more than a surface level, and vice versa. It just makes everything about the entire show better, and it does it without sacrificing the wish fulfillment of going to a fancy fantasy high school that isn't a magic school but does have magic electives, having a bunch of hot rich guys fall for her, and kicking ass with crazy OP spells. It's an escapist fantasy through and through.
I think that's like, this is probably one of the shows I only gave like 5 or 10 minutes, but potentially this is what turned me off. I won't complain that obviously like women haven't had their version of, you know, the like, you know, there's less reverse RM than there is RM, right? So, you know, that's what it appeared to me from probably trying this show, that it was just like a generic reverse RM. Obviously this time the girl is the main character and she has a bunch of like, you know, good looking guys. Most of the reverse RM I haven't found it interesting, with some exception, like the villainous one, well, one of the villainous one, but yeah.
True, but not a mindless one. It's introspective, insightful, rich in character, a story with valuable things to say about anxiety, what it's like to live with it, and how we can overcome it. It doesn't just whisk you away from your miserable reality for 20 minutes a week. It gives you something to think on when you get back, ways to understand and address the problems that make its heroine so relatable in the first place. That sort of mindful escapism also characterizes my favorite non-anime isekai, which Quest for the Best listeners will be very familiar with, Dungeon Crawler Carl, a series of English language heavy novels that I can best describe as Sword Art Online meets The Running Man meets Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which the survivors of an alien fish Nazi invasion must clear 18 increasingly deadly levels of World Dungeon on the universe's hottest reality TV show to to win our planet back. With meth head goblins, cockfighting kobolds, pyramid scheming hive minds, and some really fucking scary clowns standing in the way, plus a psychotic AI with a foot fetish acting as dungeon master, that will be a whole lot easier said than done, even with the power of magic that the dungeon somehow makes real. But lucky for Carl, he has the survival skills he learned in the Coast Guard, a beautifully supple pair of feet, and his ex-girlfriend's prize-winning Persian show cat, Princess Donut, who, due to various circumstances, can talk now and shoot magic missiles from her eyes. Plus,
I've really
she's
never
much
been
more
into the webtoon kind of aesthetic. I mean, I don't know. Don't judge a book by its cover kind of thing, right? There's a lot of anime I really like, despite not being crazy about the art style, but I don't know, like, this kind of colored webtoon, they all have an aesthetic that just doesn't feel very appealing to me.
Media savvy than Carl, which really helps in a dungeon where stream stats matter just as much as character stats. If all this sounds silly, that's only because it absolutely is. Dungeon Crawler Carl is easily the most fun I have ever had in a story with this many stat screens, but that never stops it from getting deadly serious when it needs to, or from treating everyone we meet in this zany hellhole, from fellow crawlers to alien talk show hosts to fish La Resistance members, as complex individuals with history, baggage, deeply personal motivations, and nuanced opinions on Gossip Girl. Despite the conceptual similarities to SAO, this is no massively single-player lit RPG, though, of course, Carl and Donut are the best characters of the bunch. Carl's past, in particular, is something the series really takes its time unpacking and exploring. He doesn't even fully confront it until 6 books in, but its weight can be felt through his every word and action, especially when he doesn't want to talk about it. A conceit that allows Carl to present the more relatably nerdy, surface-level aspects of his personality up front and suck that escapist fiction audience in before they realize just how little he actually is like them for real. It also allows the book to jump right into the action and start having fun with it, then slowly layer on its more profound themes of found family, how trauma transforms us immediately and over time, how oppressive systems use trauma to beat us into compliance and turn us against each other to keep us from fighting back, and what you, yes, you, can do about it if you're ever in the same room as the people responsible. Shit gets so much darker than you would ever expect from the intro, and page 2 of that intro involves an old lady being decapitated. Yet, at the heart of all that darkness burns a small, resilient flame of hope that shines all the brighter for it. And more than rich lore, strong characters, and wonderful humor, that is what really makes Dungeon Crawler Carl worth reading or listening to. The audiobook is actually peak. It's also, I think, the biggest thing that modern isekai is missing, and the real root of the problem. I don't know if you've noticed, but they don't really make isekai about people trying to get home anymore. The most recent ones I can think of are Ari Ferretta, Sunny Boy, and Dad's Been Reincarnated, which is like 3 of the last 200 or so. It used to be the entire genre. Escaflowne, Ray Earth, Abenobashi, Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, Digimon. No matter how otaku-centric the anime was, no matter how fun the other world seemed, going back was always at least a question. Sometimes the hero would be tempted to stay, and sometimes they'd give in to that temptation, or just find out there was no way back. But there were always people back home that they'd miss, goals they'd leave unfulfilled, things they'd be giving up, consequences for the choice. Nowadays, there's this persistent feeling across the entire genre that nothing on Earth is worth going back to. Of course, some of that shift comes down to an increased use of the reincarnation angle. Mine Bookworm already died, for instance, so it'd be weird if she went back to Earth to read some books and see her mom again, no matter how bad she wants that. And her story is still full of hope. It's about making the most of what you have instead of pining for what you've lost. But that's the exception that proves the rule. Most modern isekai, reincarnation types included, exist solely to comfort and console their audience over how much shit generated generally sucks while offering no solution beyond.
And again, like, I'm not gonna be one to criticize escapism and, like, you know, stuff like that, right? There's a lot of work that I like in that way, but it is true that Isekai is probably like one of the biggest, you know, genre that has that kind of stain to it of, you know, the point of the story is like, how great would it be if you got transported to this world and you're just perfect, no matter how much, like, how shit you were in real life, you're just perfect in this world, and suddenly, like, without you doing any effort for it, you know, girls love you, you're super strong, you succeed at everything you do, everybody likes you because you do great things, you know, that's part of, like, the wish fulfilling fantasy of many isekai. And a lot of the authors themselves are probably, like, you know, like that, right? They just haven't had a great time in life, and they've kind of given up on the idea of, you know, getting anything good by hard work in real life, and so they write a story like this, and then you have a lot of, like, lost people who check out the story, and it's kind of like, during the time they watch this show, it's escapism, right? We might talk about all these points about, you know, the writing and what could be better and all that, but again, I don't think anyone, like most people watching stuff like this, really cares. Again, you know, they just love the fantasy of, like, you know, going to a world where suddenly everything works out when everything failed in real life, you know, and in this world everything works out without effort, right? And again, it's appealed to me before many times, and I can still enjoy shows like that, right? Sometimes, you know, what I've definitely learned the lesson and understand the point of, you know, you need to better yourself and you know, all that, right? Sometimes, like, I might watch an isekai I actually enjoy and actually get the feeling of, yeah, I mean, I'd love to be teleported right now and being given, like, superpowers so I can be a cool guy and everything goes well without any hard work, right? You know, sometimes the fantasy appeals, even, like, especially when, you know, you're depressed or you're down or you're not in a good time of your life, right? But then if you're in a good time is when you will be a lot more, like, into the other life lesson, right? That nothing good and worth it can come without strife, right? In life, I mean, it's kind of like in games, I often like that comparison. You know, if you play Dark Souls and you spend, like, 2 hours beating one boss, you did it yourself by your own skill, by trying, right? But if you use cheat to one-shot the boss, do you feel good about it? I mean, you did it, but do you feel good about it? That's kind of the point, right? And I think it's similar with the difference between isekai and how, in real life, for the most part, most of us have to actually, like, go through a lot of hardship to get anything good. Yeah. Best way to solve the problem with returning home is the way MC was isekai. It might be because bad circumstance, yeah. Just make him die, right? Isekai Bertrand Kuhn is the best way to do it, yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be neat to go somewhere that doesn't suck? Sure, the bullies at school are relentlessly cruel and your boss values you slightly less than his paper shredder, but hey, look on the bright side. You might get hit by a truck today. It's fucking bleak if you think about it for even a second, but of course, not thinking about it is the whole point. These shows are designed to make you comfortably numb, so that situation you can't really escape from is at least a little easier to accept. And clearly, there is a huge market for that. But in capitalizing on it, isekai creators sell themselves, their audience, and their art short. Isekai can be about deep personal journeys, worlds shaken to their core by tenacious heroes with bold new ideas, and universal human truths that transcend our present time and space. Instead, we're just drowning in so much elf pussy, it doesn't even feel like anything anymore. I'm Jeff Thu, professional escapism artist.
I think he might be an elf hater. Okay, well, that was interesting. I think I've made my point about what I think of all of it. It's an interesting topic. Many times over the years, you know, like, it's been well over 10 years that isekai have become, like, you know, the biggest genre almost every season, right? And for, like, a couple of years now, I keep thinking, like, it's gonna start to fall down, it's gonna start to, like, slow down, but every time I, like, you know, I reach the point where I'm gonna start checking out all the show from a season, I go to my anime list, and yeah, there's, like, 10 isekai, and I'm like, I guess not. We're not at the point where, like, people are tired of like all the shitty one, and so there's another 10, you know. And again, I always give them a try still, and sometimes there's one that I like, but it's like 1 out of 20 or something max. It's really something. It's really something. Again, I think we're just in this reality at this point, and it's fine. Again, in the end, for like every that many terrible one, there will be a good one. So, as always, people will constantly say, you know, anime is bad now because there's so many bad ones being made. But again, because there's so many anime being made by the same metric, there's so many good ones being made compared to before, where like again, I always say it, in the 80s, in the 90s, it was a miracle if there was even 5 new anime per season, and like 4 out of 5 were terrible. Sure, now we have like 30 to 50 anime per season, and you know, 80% of them are bad by most people's standards, but 20% of them being good means many shows being good and worth watching. So again, I think people that always use that super reductive argument of like, you know, anime is bad now because there's so many bad anime, it's like a stupid thing to say, because by the same metric, because there's so many anime, there's so many good ones too. And it's kind of the same with Isekai, I guess, even though, you know, obviously, like, I would wish that less of the bad ones were being adapted and more of the good ones were being adapted, but it's not that simple, right? Obviously. Like, production committees that choose what to adapt, you know, they don't treat a light novel or manga and are like, you know, this is deeply intricate and expertly written with super interesting and original ideas, you know, like, there's a few that might happen, right? I mean, if like Kyoto Animation, for example, adapts something, like, most of the time, except if you go back to 10 years ago with Mugaiden No Phantom World, most of the time you know that they really think it's interesting, it's great, and it's kind of standard. But then, you know, like, you go to a studio like, I don't know, like A1 Picture, which is legendary, right? They've made many legendary anime, but they also like one that probably have like a production committee that's like, keeps churning out this shitty like Isekai, right? The other one is what's the name again? I forget, but there's a bunch that are like known for that, right? Yeah. Let's be honest, all problem with anime Isekai is like a budget. In a genre, soon your sale will be closed, and you can't make a long-time story, so you need scissoring story just to fit. Maybe. Anyway, that's my take on all this. That was an interesting stream. Again, we'll see if the stream gets blocked because of anime videos, but if it doesn't, I really want to do more stream like this where we watch like video essay about anime, and I can talk a lot about things I have to say, right? I kind of realized that I struggle, like, when I've done stream before that were just talk stream about like anime subject, I kind of struggle to make it cohesive, but when we react to an essay video like this, it's much easier when I can just argue, reply, or like expand on what the video is talking about. As always, I'm kind of stuck doing reaction, right? But it works much better for me. I guess I'm better in this way, because if I do like a free talk stream, I'll quickly like run out of idea myself, or like forget my own ideas. This works better. So yeah, Mother's Basement is nice. That was fun. I'll do this again now. Anyway, I am dying. It's so hot. So I'm gonna end it here. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Like, subscribe, comment. Thank you guys for watching and coming. I'll see you guys next time. See you.